Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into capitalism versus communism. In the next few minutes you will see how two rival systems answer the same questions about ownership, power, and everyday life in radically different ways. You will hear why prices can act like messages, why plans can misfire even with the best intentions, and how the rules of a system quietly shape human choices for decades. If you have ever wondered why some economies line shelves while others ration lines, or why some reforms stick and others unravel, this is your map. Let's set the stage with clear definitions and a bit of intellectual honesty. When we say capitalism here, think of a rule set where most productive assets are privately owned, where people are free to start and close businesses, where prices emerge from exchange, and where profit and loss act like a scoreboard that rewards solving real problems and penalizes waste. Coordination happens through markets. Nobody sees the whole picture, but millions of small bets, guided by prices, add up to a surprisingly coherent pattern. When we say communism in its classic sense, think of a rule set that abolishes private ownership of the means of production and replaces markets with a comprehensive plan. A planning authority allocates resources, sets output targets, and assigns labor. Distribution is meant to be based on need. The promise is moral and powerful: eliminate exploitation, end chaos, and harmonize production with human welfare by design rather than by competition. Now pause with me on a simple question. Who holds the right to decide, and who bears the consequences when decisions go wrong? In a market setting, owners and entrepreneurs face the consequences directly through losses, bankruptcy, and exit. In a planning setting, ministries or committees face political consequences, while enterprises often face administrative ones. That difference does not just live in textbooks. It changes how a factory manager reacts to bad news, how a farmer thinks about a bumper harvest, and how an engineer reports quality data when a target is looming at month end. These systems rise from a deep historical debate. On one side, Adam Smith describes how specialization and exchange, inside a framework of property and law, generate wealth that no single designer could script. On the other, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels argue that capital accumulation under private ownership inevitably concentrates power and alienates labor, so the solution is to socialize ownership and plan production. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and the debate jumps off the page. After the revolutions of 1917, leaders sign decrees that rapidly restructure ownership and authority. Theories become operating manuals, and whole societies become test cases. Ask yourself another question. How does knowledge travel? In markets, prices compress millions of facts into a single signal that says produce more of this, less of that. In a plan, signals are administrative. Targets stand in for the missing price. If a shoe factory must meet a quota by weight, you may get heavier shoes. If it must meet a quota by pairs, you may get flimsier ones. No one wakes up intending to game the system quietly instructs them to. But we should be fair. Both systems claim moral purpose. Markets promise freedom of choice and rapid discovery, yet they can generate inequality and cycles. Plans promise security and equality, yet they can generate shortages and a quiet bureaucracy of fear. The point today is not to preach, but to trace how rules create incentives, and how incentives create patterns, year after year. So here is our working lens for the entire talk, stated plainly now so you can test it as we go. Rule choice shapes signal quality. Signal quality shapes behavior. Behavior compounds into outcomes. Change the rule, you change the message. Change the message, you change the world people build on Monday morning. A quick timeline to orient us. The intellectual roots stretch from the late 18th century through the 19th. The practical experiments arrive in the 20th. After 1917, the Soviet state attempts full central planning. After 1945, similar models spread across Eastern Europe and beyond. Meanwhile, market economies evolved too, from classical laissez-faire toward regulated competition, social insurance, and mixed arrangements, always arguing about where to draw the line between private choice and public command. Different paths, same underlying question: who decides, and how do we correct mistakes? One last piece for this opening frame. Evidence matters. We will lean on primary texts for the claims of each system and on historical data where it exists for outcomes. When we talk about ideas, we will show you where they were written. When we talk about results, we will point to what was measured, or at least documented by the people who had to wait in the queue or balance the books at the end of the quarter. The goal is not to win a debate point. The goal is to see clearly. So keep this slide's core claim in mind as we move forward. Capitalism coordinates through voluntary exchange and price signals, distributing decision rights widely and punishing persistent error through loss. Communism coordinates through a central plan that aims to replace the price system with deliberate allocation, concentrating decision rights and attempting to suppress error through administrative correction. Each choice sets off a cascade of incentives you can watch, like ripples on a lake, spreading from the policy center to the shop floor to the family dinner table. Let's talk about knowledge. Not what people think in theory, but the messy, local, constantly changing facts that live inside a factory, a farm, a shipping schedule, and yes, even a neighborhood street market. Who knows that a certain machine is running hot today? Who sees that oranges came in a little bruised this week? Who notices that demand for winter boots jumped because the first snow came early? None of that sits neatly in a single office. It's scattered among thousands of people who barely know one another. So here's the problem in one sentence: how do we coordinate action when knowledge is dispersed? Prices are one answer. They act like little telegrams, compressing a mountain of facts into a nudge. A higher price whispers, produce more. A lower price says, maybe slow down. You don't need to know why a component became scarce. The price already captured the why and passed along the what to do next. It's astonishingly economical as a communication system. Now compare that with administrative targets. When a plan replaces prices, the system has to invent a different kind of message. Instead of saying, the price of copper rose, make substitutes, it says, the ministry target for copper output is X, the allocation to your plant is Y, and your quota for finished goods is Z. Can it work? Of course it can, especially for simple, stable needs. But when the world shifts suddenly, the plan has to be revised by people far from the shop floor. That takes time. And while the revision is traveling through the hierarchy, managers still have monthly targets to hit. Which brings us to incentives. In a market, a firm that misreads demand pays a clear penalty: unsold inventory, falling revenue, eventually losses that force adaptation or exit. The same pressure rewards getting it right. In a system of administrative targets, the scoreboard shifts. The manager's career depends on meeting quotas and avoiding trouble. If the target is tons produced, the quickest way to survive is to hit tons. If the target is units produced, the quickest way is to hit units. What happens to quality? It quietly becomes a variable to adjust when the deadline looms. You can see how unintended outcomes creep in without any villain in the story. Suppose a factory is judged by output weight. Heavier items become strangely attractive. If it is judged by number of pieces, thin and flimsy suddenly make more sense. If delivery penalties are severe at month end, there is a frantic surge of shipments in the final days, a practice workers sometimes call storming. Nobody set out to waste resources. The rule of the game did that on their behalf. And what about consumers? When price signals are muted but money still circulates, you can get what economists call a monetary overhang: too much money chasing too few goods. The visible symptom is the queue. People pay with their time when they cannot pay with flexible prices. If you have ever stood in a long line for an everyday item, you already know how that hidden tax feels. Over time, these frictions teach people to cultivate personal connections, to set aside favors, to hold back goods until they can swap them for something they actually need. Informal workarounds bloom whenever formal signals are weak. But let's also be honest about prices. They are not sacred, they are signals with strengths and weaknesses. When they move freely, they transmit local information blazingly fast. When they are capped, fixed, or replaced by averages, they go dim and start to mislead. A price that cannot rise in a shortage tells producers, stay calm, nothing to see here. A target that cannot fall in a slump tells managers, keep pushing, even if the warehouse is stuffed. In both cases, the message drifts away from reality. Here's a simple mental model you can keep in your pocket. Ask 3 questions of any system. First, how does knowledge about real scarcity and real preference travel? Second, what happens to the people who act on that knowledge, whether they are right or wrong? Third, how quickly can the message and the reward structure adjust when the world surprises us, as it always does? If the answers are, through prices, via profit and loss, and quickly, you will see fast discovery and fast correction. If the answers are, through targets, via administrative approval, and slowly, you will see steady effort but also predictable mismatches at the edges, especially when conditions shift. So the headline for this slide is simple. Prices are a decentralized language that turns local facts into global coordination. Administrative targets are a centralized language that tries to speak for everyone at once. The first tends to encourage experimentation because errors are contained and costly for the decision maker. The second tends to encourage caution or target gaming because errors are shared, political, and often softened. Neither system is perfect. But they do not fail in the same way, and they do not teach people the same habits. As we move forward, keep listening for the messages each system sends to its participants. The words may be policy memos or numbers on a receipt, but the meaning is the same: do more of this, less of that. When the message lines up with reality, people thrive. When it doesn't, they get creative in ways that tell you something is off. If knowledge is the raw material, money is the measuring stick, and prices are the numbers on the ruler. When the ruler is clear and consistent, builders can cut straight lines. When the ruler stretches or shrinks in your hand, good luck getting the parts to fit. Think about profit and loss for a moment. Those aren't moral judgments, they are survival signals. A profit says, the bundle of resources you just rearranged is valued by others more than the inputs you used. A loss says, the world would rather have those inputs back in their previous form. That is how an economy calculates, in real time, what should continue and what should stop. The key is that the calculation needs a stable yardstick. If the currency is trusted and prices are allowed to move, profit and loss reveal which plans line up with reality and which ones don't. Now imagine the yardstick starts to warp. If the money supply outruns the goods available, you get what people feel long before they label it: cash that buys less each month. In a market setting, prices rise to ration scarce goods and pull in substitutes. It's not fun, but the signal is loud and targeted. In a system of administered prices, where many prices are fixed, the pressure has to go somewhere else. It goes into queues, empty shelves, personal connections, and side payments. Economists call this a monetary overhang, too much money relative to things to buy at official prices. The overhang shows up not just as waiting, but as a quiet migration to secondary markets where the real price, whispered rather than posted, does the rationing. There is another angle here. Calculation isn't only about the present, it's also about the future. Investors, whether they are farmers choosing seeds or engineers choosing a new machine, need price signals they can trust. If credit is allocated by political directive, or if losses are routinely erased by subsidies, the math changes. You don't compare expected revenue to cost in a hard way. You compare political priorities to administrative forgiveness. Projects that would fail in a hard budget world can pass in a soft budget world, not because they suddenly became efficient, but because the arithmetic is being done with a pencil that has an eraser on both ends. Consider how this plays out at the margin. In the absence of credible prices, planners still need numbers. They lean on average costs, past norms, or target returns. But averages hide the relevant information. The economy doesn't need to know the average cost of making a widget last year. It needs to know the cost of the next unit today. That is the marginal cost. And it needs to know how much value a buyer places on the next unit right now. That is the marginal value. When real, flexible prices disappear, the economy loses its marginal compass and starts navigating by historical maps. Those maps can be beautiful. They can also be dangerously out of date. Here's a concrete mental picture. Picture two grocery stores receiving a sudden cut in coffee shipments. In the first store, the price rises and the manager puts a small sign on the shelf asking customers to limit themselves to one bag. Some switch to tea. Some buy smaller sizes. Suppliers notice the higher price and move inventory toward the store next week. In the second store, the posted price can't change. By noon, the shelf is empty. By evening, a line forms because people heard a truck is coming. The truck arrives tomorrow, but not enough for everyone. People at the front get extra for friends. Someone trades sugar for coffee behind the building. On paper, the price never changed. In reality, it changed in hidden ways. The yardstick moved, but only for those who knew how to find it. Now think about transitions, where a planned system experiments with market signals at the edges. The dual-track approach says, fulfill your quota at the official price, but anything above that you can sell at a market price. That single rule tweak does something subtle and powerful. It reintroduces a marginal signal without demanding an overnight revolution. Enterprises suddenly have a reason to push beyond the quota because the extra unit earns a real price. Consumers have a reason to reveal how much they value the extra unit because they can pay a real price. Does this create tensions between two price systems under one roof? Absolutely. But it also shows how a small window of honest pricing can unlock dormant energy. Finally, there is the capital market, the quiet backbone of calculation. When savers lend to projects and can earn or lose based on outcomes, capital flows toward better guesses and away from worse ones. If the flow of capital is directed by plan rather than by dispersed judgment, you can still build big things. Dams, steel mills, whole new towns. The question is whether the project selection process can hear the word stop when the world whispers it. If losses don't bite, the economy can accumulate impressive monuments and invisible misallocation at the same time. So, the headline for this slide is simple and consequential. Money is not just a medium of exchange, it is the scoreboard for economic calculation. When the scoreboard is clear and prices are allowed to speak, profit and loss discipline decision makers and guide resources toward their best use. When the scoreboard is blurred by administered prices, soft budgets, or persistent monetary overhang, the discipline weakens. People adapt, as they always do, through cues, connections, and secondary markets. The system still moves, but it moves with more friction and less truth in its signals. Hold that thought as we turn next to a concrete historical case where all these dynamics played out on a grand scale. Now we put the mechanisms on the ground and watch them walk. The Soviet command economy gives us a front row seat to how rules, signals, and incentives play out across decades, from the end of the Civil War to the late 20th century. Begin with the early experiment called war communism. In the chaos after the revolution, the state moved quickly to nationalize industry, ban most private trade, and requisition grain from the countryside. The goal was survival and control. The effect was famine, flight from cities, and a paralysis of incentives. When you cannot legally trade the food you grow, and when requisition squads arrive regardless of your effort, the rational response is to produce less and hide more. It is not a moral failing. It is the system writing the script. Then comes a strategic retreat, the new economic policy. The state keeps the commanding heights like heavy industry and banking, but it restores legal private trade for small business and agriculture. Suddenly, markets reappear at the margins. Farmers can sell surplus after a tax in kind. Street stalls buzz again. Urban life stabilizes. The lesson could have been this: a little room for voluntary exchange repairs broken signals surprisingly fast. But the pause does not last. By the late 1920s, the country pivots to comprehensive planning under Stalin. The plan prioritizes heavy industry and military capacity. Targets cascade from Gorseplan to ministries to enterprises. Steel, coal, machine tools, rail. The arithmetic is simple on paper: build the base first, consumer goods later. On the ground, it means the everyday wants of households are pushed to the back of the line while resources flow to projects with large physical outputs that are easy to count and easy to boast about. What happens inside the factory when the target is gross output? If you are judged by tons, you make items heavier. If you are judged by meters, you make them longer. If you are judged by the number of units, you shave quality when the deadline looms. Managers learn to hoard inputs, because deliveries are uncertain. Workers learn to storm at month end, a frantic push to meet quotas and avoid penalties. Storage yards fill with products that satisfy the target but not the user. None of this requires bad actors. It requires a rigid target and a career that depends on hitting it. Soft budgets are the quiet partner in this story. When an enterprise that misses its target expects a bailout, losses do not discipline future choices. The safest strategy becomes political compliance and statistical success. You report numbers the plan wants to see, ask for relief when reality resists, and keep the machines running even when the warehouse whispers that no one needs another shipment of the same widget. Over time, this logic seeps into maintenance, innovation, and risk-taking. Why experiment with a new process that could fail when you can deliver on the old metric and live to see another plan? Meanwhile, agriculture bears the cost of heavy industry's hunger. Collectivization aims to reshape the countryside into large units that are easier to control and to supply the cities and the army. The human toll is severe. Incentives dim when a household's effort is diluted across a collective and when private plots are constrained. Output lags. The plan responds with targets and requisitions, which worsen the problem they are trying to solve. Again, no mustache twirling is necessary. It is the rule set producing the outcome. And yet, people adapt. A second economy grows in the cracks, where goods and favors move along personal networks known as blat. If the official price is unreliable, you trade on relationships. If the official queue is long, you find a shortcut through a friend's cousin at the depot. If the official product breaks, you take it to a moonlighting machinist who knows how to fix it after hours. These are not just charming anecdotes. They are the system's way of reintroducing the signals it suppressed, quietly, privately, and often illegally. Information, too, finds back channels. When what can be printed is constrained, what must be said travels in samizdat, hand-copied texts passed from friend to friend. Economic truths circulate the same way practical spare parts do. Both tell you that the official picture is incomplete. Both are forms of agency in a world of rigid targets. You can learn a lot from the kinds of successes the system was good at. It could mobilize resources for visible, countable projects. Dams, canals, steel mills, space achievements that genuinely inspired pride. But the same structure struggled to stock a shoe store with the right sizes, to keep refrigerators in supply, to deliver fresh produce reliably, to encourage honest repair of chronic bottlenecks that did not align with the plan's priorities. The difference is not between big and small. It is between projects where a central target can stand in for real demand and projects where only a flexible price and a dissatisfied customer can signal truth. If you listen closely, you can hear the feedback loops at work. Targets reshape behavior. Behavior reshapes reports. Reports reshape next year's targets. The loop closes, but not necessarily around reality. In the short run, this can look stable. In the long run, mismatches accumulate like sediment in a riverbed. Channels narrow, flow slows, workarounds multiply, and the everyday experience of the consumer becomes a barometer more honest than the statistical yearbook. So the Soviet command economy is not a morality tale about good intentions and bad intentions. It is a case study in how rules filter knowledge and bend incentives. Heavy industry did grow. Military capacity did expand. The bill was paid by consumers waiting in lines, by agriculture pressed beyond its signals, and by managers trained to please the plan rather than the person buying the product. People, being people, found side doors. The side doors are the clearest evidence that the front door was jammed. Let's step into a rare natural experiment. Same language, shared history, similar culture, and the same tragic rubble after the war. Then, two very different rule sets. West Germany leans into market coordination with a hard currency reform and open trade. East Germany follows the architecture of central planning with administered prices and enterprise targets. If you ever wanted to watch institutions change outcomes while holding a lot of other variables steady, this is the case. Start with the currency reform in the West in the late 1940s. Overnight, the money in people's pockets becomes a yardstick you can trust again. Prices are allowed to move. Shelves that had been empty under rationing begin to fill. Why? Because honest prices do two things at once. They reward bringing goods to market and they stop rewarding hoarding. A shopkeeper who was hiding stock for fear of selling at a loss now has a reason to put it out. A manufacturer stops waiting for an allocation letter and starts responding to real demand. The result looks like magic, but it is just clear signals, finally turned back on. In the East, the logic is different. Enterprises receive planned targets for output, and ministries allocate key inputs. Consumer goods compete with heavy industry for resources, and heavy industry usually wins because it is easier to count and easier to report. If a factory is told to produce a certain number of coats at a fixed price, it will meet the number, but the sizes might be wrong. If a refrigerator factory is judged by units, the quickest path is to churn out the model that best fits the quota, not the one that best fits the kitchen. Managers learn to keep a reserve of parts in case the next shipment is late. Consumers learn to ask a cousin who knows someone at the warehouse. You can watch the divergence in productivity statistics across the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The West compounds gains through competition, export discipline, and a capital market that punishes persistent error. Firms that miss the mark shrink or exit, and their resources move to those that guessed better. The East compounds a different pattern. Targets are met, often heroically, but the targets are not always aligned with actual wants. When the numbers look good and the shelves look thin, you are staring at a signal problem. Consider the everyday experience, because it is the most honest indicator. In the West, you walk into a store and choose among brands. You complain if quality slips. The store responds because it has to. In the East, you make do with what arrives. When something breaks, the official channel for repair may be slow, so a grey market in spare parts and after-hours technicians blossoms. Not because people are corrupt by nature, but because the system is teaching them that relationships and timing can substitute for flexible prices. Migration speaks, too. Before the wall goes up, many people vote with their feet. They are not moving from poor to rich in a single leap, they are moving from a rule set where decision rights and feedback feel responsive to one where they feel distant and blunt. After the wall, the pressure can no longer express itself through legal exit, so you see it instead in jokes, in cues, in careful saving for rare consumer goods, in the way people plan a month around the rumor of a shipment. There is a temptation to say, the West had more money. But that begs the question, why did it have more to spend? Because the combination of tradable prices, open competition, and a harder budget line rewarded making what people were actually willing to buy, at a quality they would buy again. The East, by contrast, could marshal resources for striking projects and often produced admirable engineering in priority sectors, but the signals that coordinate millions of small daily decisions were weaker. Over time, that weakness shows up in the texture of life, the ease of finding shoes that fit, the wait for an apartment repair, the availability of a part for your washing machine. This is not a story of angels and villains. It is geometry. Change the rule set and you bend the path people walk. When managers face profit and loss, they search for what buyers value and they drop what buyers ignore. When managers face plan compliance and administrative review, they search for ways to satisfy the metric that decides their fate and cushion themselves against shortages they cannot control. The behaviors are rational in both places. The difference is what the system asks them to be rational about. So when you look at charts of output per person or consumption bundles across these two Germanys, try not to get lost in the lines. Ask what signals created those lines. In the West, the line reflects the steady hum of feedback coming from millions of transactions, adjusting course every day. In the East, the line reflects the steadiness of targets achieved despite frictions, and the hidden effort of citizens who built informal circuits to make life work when the official circuit flickered. If there is a quiet moral here, it is that everyday abundance depends not only on how much a society can build at the top, but on how well it listens at the bottom. The grocery list, the repair ticket, the shoe size. Small signals, big consequences. Germany's split experiment let the world see those consequences accumulate in real time. To understand how small rule changes can unlock enormous energy, look at China after the late 1970s. The country does not flip a master switch from plan to market overnight. Instead, it opens windows. Air starts moving. People feel it first in their fields and workshops long before it shows up in official statistics. Begin with the countryside. Under the commune system, villagers work collectively and deliver quotas at fixed prices. Effort and reward are diluted. Then local experiments spread quietly, the household responsibility system. The collective keeps ownership on paper, but households are contracted specific plots and, crucially, they keep the surplus after meeting the quota. That one change rewires incentives without a grand speech. Suddenly, the family that solves a planting problem or weeds a little better sees the difference at harvest. Output jumps, not because the weather changed, but because the rule did. You can feel the logic in your bones. When your decisions matter to your own table, you pay closer attention. Now watch the factories and the towns. The state still sets planned targets and prices for core goods, but a new idea arrives called dual-track pricing. Fulfill your plan quota at the official price, and anything above that you may sell at a market price. This is a narrow doorway for market signals to enter a planned hallway. It is enough. At the margin, enterprises that can produce a bit more have a reason to push. Buyers who value a bit more have a way to show it. A real price for the extra unit starts coordinating the two, even though the official price remains for the base. Is there tension between the tracks? Of course. But the tension is productive because it lets information seep back into decisions. Special economic zones add another layer. Selected cities and coastal regions are allowed to experiment with trading rules, foreign investment, and different tax arrangements. Think of them as policy laboratories with real stakes. Entrepreneurs there encounter a simpler question set: can you make something someone wants at a price they will pay, and can you do it again next month? Success teaches quickly, and failure is allowed to happen at a smaller scale. The lessons do not stay in the zones. They leak inland through supply chains and returning workers, changing expectations about what is possible. You can see the pattern. None of these reforms require the plan to disappear on Monday. They allow reality to speak at the edges and reward those who listen. Township and village enterprises emerge to fill gaps the plan did not notice. Farmers diversify into higher value crops once their surplus is truly theirs. Small workshops multiply because entry is no longer a political decision, it is a personal bet. Each bet that works becomes a signal to neighbors. I saw them do it. Maybe I can, too. Still, this is a mixed system, and the mix matters. State banks remain dominant allocators of credit. Some state firms continue under soft budgets. The household registration system, the HUKU, restricts labor mobility, shaping who can follow opportunity and under what conditions. Price signals grow louder, but they are not uniform across sectors. That unevenness generates its own patterns, fast-moving belts of activity alongside bottlenecks where old constraints linger. If you have ever watched a river cut new channels after a flood, you have the idea. Water finds the lowest path first, then slowly wears broader routes as obstacles erode. Pay attention to how modest policy words turn into vivid daily changes. A family that once met a grain quota now experiments with vegetables for a local market. A manager who once counted units for the ministry now counts customers for the weekend stall. A town that once waited for an allocation letter now watches export orders. These are not abstract shifts. They are changes in who asks the questions that matter and who is allowed to answer them with their own hands. One more subtle point. Gradualism protects learning. When the new track reveals a mistake, the whole system does not collapse. You can adjust the rule and keep going. When a zone proves a concept, you can replicate it. When a practice stalls, you can retire it. This is not elegant in a theoretical sense. It is robust in a human sense. It treats policy like engineering under uncertainty: prototype, test, iterate. So the headline for this slide is that China's early reforms work not by delivering the perfect blueprint, but by reintroducing truthful margins. Households own their effort again. Factories face a real price for extra output. Regions are allowed to try, fail, and try again. You do not need a speech about incentives to see their power. You can see it in the harvest, the shop floor, the port. Now we zoom out and look for patterns that keep reappearing when production is coordinated by targets rather than by prices. Think of this as a field guide to predictable frictions. Different countries. Different decades. Same recurring footprints. First, target gaming. When your survival depends on hitting a number, you will hit the number. If the metric is tons, products get heavier. If the metric is units, products get thinner. If delivery by month end is sacred, shipments surge right before the deadline even if inventories are already full. This is not about good people versus bad people. It is about a rule that quietly turns creativity toward meeting the metric rather than serving the user. The product you can hold in your hand reflects the metric more than the need it was meant to satisfy. Second, soft budget constraints. In a world where persistent losses lead to exit, error is costly and educational. In a world where persistent losses trigger a bailout, error is survivable and sometimes even rational. Managers learn that the safest path is to be politically compliant and statistically successful, not necessarily economically sound. Projects continue because stopping them is more painful administratively than funding them again. Over time, this breeds resilience of the wrong kind, the ability to keep going without learning. Third, shortages and the rise of the second economy. When posted prices cannot adjust and official allocations miss the mark, the pressure must find another outlet. It becomes queues, ration coupons, and relationships. People pay with time. They pay with favors. They pay with quiet side payments that restore a price where the label says there is none. You can see the signal trying to speak through back channels. If the queue is always long for a particular good, the message is simple: the official price is lying. A hidden market appears to tell the truth. Fourth, quality drift and maintenance neglect. When output targets dominate, preventative maintenance is easy to postpone. Spare parts are hoarded instead of installed because deliveries are uncertain. Quality control is something you do if it does not endanger the quota. That logic makes sense in the short run. In the long run, machines run down, waste rises, and the cost of catching up balloons. The system did not intend to underinvest in uptime. It simply taught people to survive this month first and worry about the rest later. Fifth, information distortion. Reports travel upward because decisions travel downward. If a plant reports a shortfall, it risks scrutiny. If it reports a success, it earns goodwill or at least avoids a scolding. Add in a few layers of managers who each prefer to pass along good news and you get a statistical yearbook that glows while the shop floor flickers. Again, no conspiracy is required. The sausage is made by the rule that rewards the gloss and punishes the blemish. Sixth, innovation lag. Breakthroughs require freedom to guess wrong and a payoff for guessing right. In a target culture, guessing wrong can look like disobedience and guessing right might still be judged by whether you met the quota. The safest innovations are those that help satisfy the metric, not those that challenge it. You will still see brilliant engineering, especially where national pride demands it, but you will see less of the mundane, compounding improvements that come from thousands of experiments guided by customers and competition. The system trains brains to anticipate the plan rather than to surprise it. Seventh, the time tax on households. When goods are in chronic short supply, people schedule their lives around rumors of deliveries. They leave work early to stand in line. They trade tips like currency. The line becomes a hidden ledger of opportunity cost. Hours that could have gone to study, to side hustles, to family time, are spent guarding a place in front of a store. Even when pay is nominally equal, access becomes unequal because time is not distributed evenly. The official ideal of fairness is quietly undercut by the reality of scarcity logistics. If you put these frictions together, a picture emerges. Central plans can move mountains when the goal is clear, countable, and time-bound. Build a dam, launch a rocket, mobilize steel. But when the goal is to match a million small and seasonal preferences, to rotate inventories, to maintain a huge web of machines, to say yes to unexpected opportunities and no to pet projects, the same structure struggles. The frictions are not accidents. They are the footprints of a system that speaks in quotas rather than in prices, that punishes the wrong kind of error and forgives the wrong kind of persistence. So as you evaluate any proposal for tighter central control, ask a sober question. How will it handle the 7 frictions we just walked through? What prevents target gaming? What hardens budgets? What lets prices whisper the truth instead of forcing queues to shout it? Where is the safe space to experiment and fail fast? If there are good answers, you will see flexibility. If there are not, you will see the same footprints again, because people are rational learners inside whatever rules we give them. If central plans struggle to hear the small signals, markets are built to amplify them. But let's be grown-ups about this. Markets are not saints, they are tools. They shine at discovery and discipline, and they stumble in familiar ways. Knowing both sides is the only way to use them wisely. Start with discovery. In a market, thousands of tiny bets run at once. A baker tries a new recipe. A coder ships a feature on Friday night. A farmer plants a different seed mix because last spring came late. Most of these choices are invisible to the evening news, but each one is an experiment with a yes or a no at the register. When customers say yes, that yes funds the next round. When they say no, the project shrinks or dies. No committee had to convene. Feedback just arrived in cash. That is creative destruction in everyday shoes, constant trial, error, learning, and replacement. Now the discipline. Losses bite. If your guesses are wrong, if your costs are high, if your quality slips and you ignore it, the market does not send you a stern memo. It sends you fewer customers. Keep ignoring the message and the bank sends you a very different kind of memo. This hardness is not cruelty for its own sake, it's the part of the system that stops errors from compounding. You cannot keep burning scarce resources without persuading someone to keep paying for your attempt. That persuasion requires results. Add one more strength, reallocation speed. Because assets have owners and prices, they can move. Machines can be resold. Leases can be signed by a new tenant. People can quit and take a better offer down the street. When a shock hits, the ability to reassign resources quickly is not a small convenience, it is the difference between a recession that heals and a stagnation that lingers. Markets are messy in the turbulence, but the mess is motion. And motion is how an economy climbs out of holes. Okay, now the failure modes. Externalities are the classic one. If I run a factory and push smoke onto your laundry, the price I see at my loading dock does not include the cost you pay on your clothes line. My private math says keep producing, the social math says wait a second. Without some way to price the spillover or limit it, the market will overproduce the smoky thing and underproduce the clean alternative. This is not a rare edge case. Pollution, congestion, overfishing, these are all places where the individual transaction misses a cost the neighbor bears. Market power is the next failure. If a firm gains enough control over a bottleneck, it can raise prices above competitive levels and underdeliver on quality. That weakens the discovery process because the feedback loop gets muffled. A protected champion can defend the castle with contracts and lobbying instead of with better products. The scoreboard still shows profits, but now the signal is mixing value creation with value extraction, which confuses everyone trying to learn from it. Finance can wobble, too. Credit expands when times are good, optimism layers on optimism, and then a surprise reveals that some of the bets were built on sand. When debt unwinds, the rush to safety can starve good projects along with bad. Prices fall not because the underlying idea became worthless, but because everyone needs cash at the same time. Left alone, markets eventually clear. But the path can be brutal for people with thin cushions. If you have ever watched a small business get crushed by a downturn that was not its fault, you know the difference between theoretical resilience and lived fragility. Distribution is a quieter failure mode. Markets are exceptionally good at answering what gets made and how, but they are agnostic about who starts the race with how many resources. Over time, compounding advantages can concentrate wealth and opportunity in fewer hands. That does not make the price system false, but it does change who can afford to choose, experiment, or absorb a mistake. In a society that cares about broad opportunity, that question does not go away just because the factory is efficient. There is also the problem of information asymmetry. If one side of a trade knows much more than the other and can't credibly share it, good products can be driven out by bad ones. Think of used cars before good warranties and ratings. When buyers can't tell cherries from lemons, they assume every car might be a lemon and bid the price down. Sellers of good cars exit rather than accept low prices. The market shrinks until someone invents a signal or a contract that restores trust. Markets usually solve these problems with institutions, disclosure rules, reputations, third-party audits, warranties. But the fix is not automatic. It's design work. So how do you take the strengths without pretending away the weaknesses? One approach is simple in spirit, hard in practice. Keep the game competitive and the signals honest, then target the specific failure modes with narrow tools. Price pollution where you can measure it. Prevent acquisitions that turn bottlenecks into choke points. Let financial risk live with those who choose it, while building cushions that keep a credit freeze from becoming a social ice age. Improve transparency so buyers and sellers can actually match. The idea is to correct the place where the signal is broken without turning down the whole sound system. Notice what we are not doing on this slide. We are not declaring a grand philosophy. We are inspecting a machine. Where does it self-correct? Where does it drift? Where does it need a guardrail? Markets, when left able to hear and respond to truth, are relentless teachers. They will find the cheaper way, the better design, the timing that customers prefer. But they will also ignore a cost on the neighbor's lawn until someone makes that cost visible in a price or a rule. Both realities can be true at once. If you keep that balanced picture in mind, you can see why some societies achieve both dynamism and stability. They let feedback be sharp where discovery is needed and soften the edge where spillovers or panics would otherwise punish bystanders. Getting that mix right is not about slogans. It is about being honest about how people actually behave when the scoreboard changes. Hold that frame as we turn to something markets and plans both struggle with in different ways, the moral choices regular people make when the formal system misfires and informal workarounds appear. When formal signals get fuzzy, people do not freeze. They adapt. This is where economics meets character, where policy meets the dinner table. The story is not only about systems, it is about the choices ordinary people make when the official path is blocked and life still has to go on. Start with a simple picture. A mother stands in a line that wraps around the block for cooking oil. She has already worked a full day. She hears a whisper that if she goes to the back door at 5, someone might set aside a bottle. What is she optimizing? Not an equation. She is reducing risk and saving time the only way the system allows. A favor today, a returned favor next week. That is not corruption in a cartoon sense. It is a substitute for a price that cannot adjust and a delivery schedule that will not admit uncertainty. It is agency, reshaped by constraint. Now scale that up to a neighborhood. When shops cannot match supply to demand, people knit informal networks. A cousin who drives a truck quietly sells extra sacks. A machinist repairs appliances after hours with parts he scavenges from a factory that never gets the right shipments on time. A teacher tutors in the evenings because her official pay buys less each month. These are not footnotes. They are the parallel circuits that keep a household system running when the main grid flickers. You can call it grey market activity. You can also call it survival with dignity. There is a vocabulary for how citizens respond. Exit, voice, and loyalty. Exit is the choice to leave a firm, a town, or, if allowed, a country when the formal system no longer fits. Voice is the attempt to fix it from within, letters, meetings, petitions, the 1,000 small acts of complaint that are really acts of care. Loyalty is the decision to stay and bear costs because the community matters more than the inefficiency. None of these choices are clean. Most people blend them. They stay, but they nudge. They complain, but they also find a back door because their kids need shoes this week, not after the next 5-year plan is revised. Notice the ethics are not simple. If you jump a queue through a friend, someone behind you waits longer. If you refuse on principle, your family pays a price for a lesson the system may not learn. If you speak up, you might improve the process, or you might paint a target on your back. If you leave, you protect your future, but you also remove pressure that could have forced change. Real people weigh these trade-offs in real time, with incomplete information and limited power. That is why moral agency belongs in the same slide deck as budget constraints. The math cannot see every cost. Workarounds tell the truth the official numbers will not. If spare parts travel in satchels after dark, you have just discovered a bottleneck the plan did not acknowledge. If teachers moonlight to make ends meet, you have learned something about the purchasing power of salaries and the real inflation rate on necessities. If a city's best apprentices keep leaving for a zone or another country, the migration flows are reporting on local opportunity more accurately than any brochure. These are data points, even if they are not the kind that fit neatly in a table. And markets are not immune to this moral landscape. When a downturn hits and credit tightens, families improvise in different ways. Some take on extra gigs. Some lean on relatives. Some delay medical care. A spreadsheet can model the averages, but the human experience is lumpy. Who has a network to borrow from? Who has time to search for workarounds? Who bears the stress quietly until it surfaces as something else? A society that understands agency pays attention to these uneven margins, because that is where policy that looks neutral on paper can tilt hard in practice. Here is a practical way to read workarounds without cynicism. Ask what problem they are solving that the official channel is not. If a workaround saves time, the queue is lying. If it smooths a supply spike, the price is frozen. If it moves people across boundaries, opportunity is stuck behind a rule. Fix the underlying message and the workaround will often fade on its own, because people prefer the legal, reliable route when it actually works. So the moral thread running through this slide is not a sermon. It is a reminder that systems are never the only actors in the story. Individuals look for light. They make choices inside constraints. And those choices, multiplied by millions, become signals of their own. If you want to see a system clearly, you have to watch the official charts and the unofficial dance at the same time. Let's pull the camera up to cruising altitude and look for the recurring shapes. A century is long enough to smooth out slogans. Over decades, rules either keep their promises or they quietly betray them. What do we actually see when we follow the signals, the incentives, and the outcomes across time? Start with the simple chain that has been hiding in plain sight all along. Rule choice shapes signal quality. Signal quality shapes behavior. Behavior compounds into outcomes. It sounds almost childlike until you trace it through a factory, a household, a bank, a ministry, and a border crossing. Change the rule and you change the message. Change the message and you change the habits people use to survive. Habits, repeated, become institutions. Institutions, aged, become the texture of everyday life. One pattern is about feedback speed. Systems that let prices adjust and let failure bite tend to correct faster. You see shorter, sharper mistakes, followed by reallocation and learning. Systems that hold prices still and cushion losses tend to correct slower. You see longer, quieter mistakes, followed by administrative fixes and workarounds. In both worlds, people adapt. The difference is whether the adaptation is public and disciplined, or private and improvised. Another pattern is about what gets measured and therefore what gets made. When targets stand in for needs, output becomes a performance for the metric. Heavy things when tons are rewarded. Many things when units are rewarded. Headlines and ribbon cuttings when prestige is rewarded. When transactions stand in for needs, quality, and fit drift to the center because a yes today must become a yes again next month. Over time, that second habit builds brands, maintenance cultures, and customer service reflexes that seem natural until you try to build them from scratch. A third pattern sits in the capital stock itself. Where budgets are hard, assets migrate toward higher valued uses because owners have to answer for waste. Where budgets are soft, assets linger in place because stopping is politically costly. Both places build impressive things. One tends to retire mistakes earlier. The other tends to live with them longer. After 20 years, you can walk a city and feel which habit lives there in the empty buildings, the humming workshops, and the age of the machines. There is a pattern in information honesty. In systems that punish bad news, the truth travels underground. In systems that reward timely correction, the truth travels in daylight. The same engineer exists in both worlds. The difference is whether she is taught to hide the problem until month end or to raise her hand on Tuesday morning. Multiply that decision by 1,000,000 Tuesdays and you get a divergence that does not fit neatly in a bar chart, but it shows up in fewer catastrophic surprises and more boring mid-course corrections. You also see a pattern in the emotional climate of households. Where lines and shortages are common, people plan with rumor and guard time like money. Where shelves are reliable and repairs are fast, people plan with calendars and guard money like time. The official wage matters in both places, but the hidden taxes are different. In one, you pay with patience and favors. In the other, you pay with cash and, when a mistake happens, with the sting of a refund or a lost customer that pushes the system to improve. And here is a pattern that makes everyone uncomfortable because it points back at us. Concentrated power, whether economic or political, tends to drift toward using rules to protect itself. In markets, that shows up as efforts to turn competition off at the bottlenecks. In plans, that shows up as efforts to make the metric easier to meet and harder to question. Guardrails exist because this drift is human, not partisan. If you don't build the guardrails, the drift becomes the design. Finally, the long arc of mixed systems tells a calm story. Pure forms are rare. Most societies blend price signals with public rules. The successful blends share a family resemblance. They keep prices informative and budgets hard in the everyday business of making and buying things. They use public tools narrowly where private signals predictably fail, and they test those tools against the possibility of unintended consequences. They do not pretend that human beings become angels if you move them into a ministry, nor do they pretend that every market outcome is automatically just. They act like engineers, not crusaders. If you remember nothing else from this slide, remember the shape of the loop. Rules create messages. Messages create habits. Habits create the world we call normal. When you hear a proposal that promises abundance by decree or fairness by ignoring feedback, run it through the loop. Ask what signals it strengthens, what signals it mutes, and how quickly it admits a mistake. Over a century, those three questions predict more than the speeches do. We have covered a century of experiments, arguments, and everyday choices. Here are the plain lessons I want you to hold on to the next time a confident plan or a shiny market pitch comes your way. Design matters. Who holds the decision rights, who bears the downside, and who can say stop without permission? When those three are aligned, errors are loud and short. When they are split apart, errors are quiet and long. That is not ideology, that is how people behave when incentives meet reality. Money matters. A credible yardstick lets profit and loss tell the truth. When the scoreboard is clear, resources migrate toward better guesses. When it blurs, the gain continues but the learning slows. Cues, side deals, and frayed trust step in to do the job prices couldn't. Feedback speed matters. Systems that admit surprise quickly get to be wrong in small ways and right more often later. Systems that resist surprise keep the surface calm while pressure builds in the pipes. You can measure the difference in how often customers return, how often repairs happen before failure, and how often managers feel safe telling the bad news on Tuesday morning. Guardrails matter. Power concentrates, whether in a boardroom or a ministry. Left alone, it will try to make the metric easier, the competitor rarer, and the critic quieter. Healthy systems anticipate this drift and build counterweights, open entry, anti-monopoly rules, transparent accounts, independent audits, and clear property rights that are hard to bend for friends. Humility matters. Markets discover marvels and also miss costs on the neighbor's lawn. Plans can mobilize miracles and also misread everyday needs. The adult stance is not to worship either machine, but to test where each one fails and to design narrow fixes that don't muffle the signals we rely on to learn. So what should thoughtful people do next? Ask precise questions. If a policy proposes to cap a price, ask how rationing will work and who pays the time tax. If a reform proposes to privatize an industry, ask how competition will be kept real at the bottlenecks. If a program promises security, ask how it avoids training everyone to ignore costs. If a boom promises effortless wealth, ask who is holding the downside when the music stops. And because history is more than charts, there is an ethical thread to keep intact. Dignity grows where people can choose, try, and try again. Coercion grows where targets replace truth and fear replaces feedback. You don't need a manifesto to see that, you can see it in whether a young engineer feels safe to suggest a better design, whether a shop fixes a mistake without a fight, whether a family can move toward opportunity without asking permission. Open questions for you to carry forward. What mix of rules keeps prices honest while correcting genuine spillovers without smothering discovery? Where should we harden budget constraints, and where should we cushion shocks so that a recession does not become a generation's lost chance? How do we keep capital mobile enough to escape mistakes but patient enough to build what takes time? And maybe the hardest one, how do we design institutions that make telling the truth the safest career move? If you found this helpful, here is my last request. Like this video so it reaches more curious minds. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway or a case you want us to explore next. Subscribe to Truth Behind History for more deep dives that respect your intelligence. And if you want to go further, check out my book History They Tried to Erase in the description. If you enjoy thoughtful and entertaining history, there's more waiting for you on this channel. Thanks for watching. and I'll see you in the next episode.